running something a little bit unusual today. It is a L92, which is a 2007 or 8 6.2 all aluminum LS VVT, no flex fuel, no active fuel management, and the customer put a LS9 supercharger on it. And that's one of the things I tell you guys that is available to you is all these aftermarket mods. This Jeep was actually built by Motec way back in the day. I'm going to say around 2011, maybe 2012. And I find it interesting that we've been doing this for so long, yet every day I get calls from customers and say, we didn't know you were around. And most of you know we don't advertise other than maybe our YouTube channel. So a lot of customers don't know we're around, and a lot of shops don't know we're around. So this Jeep was built a long, long time ago. This Jeep was built in an era when we were hand building our harnesses, so it has a custom hand built harness. I have not seen this Jeep since it shipped from Motec at our old location, and in the interim the customer fitted a LS9 blower on it. I'm not sure where he lives, but he happened to be in Las Vegas driving it around and blew a power steering hose. The front accessory drive was reworked to fit the supercharger. So we built some power steering lines for it, and the guy asked me to test drive it. It has death wobble. He had some steering stabilizers on it. And I'll say this, death wobble can be very difficult to diagnose. A lot of you guys probably know it's more of an art than science. I've had guys with brand new 1-ton axles and heavy duty steering linkage and everything else, and under the proper conditions you hit a tire just right at the right speed and frequency and it just sets it off. The one almost sure cure for death wobble is a hydraulic ram, and we've actually fitted hydraulic rams. Now, if you're fitting a hydraulic ram just to kill death wobble, you can usually go with a small ram, like a 1.5 inch. You don't even need to go with a full-blown setup with a heavy-duty pump and reservoir and all that. You can run a West Texas off-road style ported gearbox with your stock pump and the small ram. You'll maintain a lot of the steering feel of a stock Jeep, meaning you won't lose the steering feel and get that tractor feel like you will with a 1 3/4 inch ram with high volume pump and all that. But because the ram is attached directly to the axle and then the tie rod, it's taking all the stress, and that usually kills death wobble. Death wobble is a culmination of all the slop and tolerances and looseness, flexing, whatever, between the drag link, tie rod, spindles, gearbox, sector shaft, all that. And sometimes it can be more than difficult to diagnose. Sometimes you can't get rid of it. We made some new power steering lines, used our industrial hydraulic crimper with proper hydraulic hose, same hose they use on tractors, so you shouldn't have that problem again. I will say this Jeep drives really nice. However, just like most other aftermarket fitted blowers, it does have a few anomalies. Now this is much better than a V6 in my opinion, because the V6 JK, as most of you know, runs the speed density operating system without an airflow meter. This is running an airflow meter. It's also running a proper 2-bar operating system. GM did manufacture the LSA and the LS9. The LSA being fitted to the Cadillac and the Camaro. I believe they were running in the mid 500s for horsepower. The LS9 was a larger displacement blower, and they were running over 600 horsepower. So this is an L92, which is the early, simple 6.2 LS with a LS9 blower. Cruising up the highway here is pretty awesome. You can see we're at a pretty low RPM, running over 60 miles an hour. And because this blower is adding boost slightly under a load, we're not downshifting. So if I were to compare this to the LT4 obviously is a direct injected CVVT motor, so it has more bottom end torque. But this LS 6.2 with this LS9 blower does run really good, and it does have a lot of horsepower. I'm going to say this Jeep is pushing close to 600 horsepower. So the two concerns I see so far are the brake pedal is soft. I don't know what braking system he has on this, but my guess is either it's not bled properly or he's got some large calipers on it with a stock master cylinder. So the solution would be to fit a larger master cylinder or bleed it properly. A little tip, if you guys can't get a good pedal on a stock JK, check the rear calipers. Make sure they're not swapped side to side, because if you do that, the bleeders will be on the bottom and you can never bleed it properly. The bleeders need to be on the top. The JK8 booster works pretty good with the larger calipers. I do prefer the caliper relocation kit. What that does is it uses the stock calipers and it fits a larger rotor, so it gives more leverage to the pads, but it doesn't affect the feel of the pedal because you're using the stock caliper. They're much less costly than going with half ton or 3/4 ton truck calipers. The second thing is the idle. I will say the drivability is good, got no flat spots, cruise control works great, and for nostalgic purposes, check this out. This is our really old cruise control switch with a light in it. That's what we did in the early days, is we actually modified the switch and we put a LED in it as the cruise indicator. It also acted as a fault indicator, and it was using the full GM operating system for cruise control, and it's still working great all these years later. So there's no issues there because this is running a proper 2-bar operating system. We're not fighting the issues that we have with some of the torque management based speed density systems like the Chryslers run. There is no funny upshifting and downshifting. The cruise control isn't hunting, but there is a couple of issues. And my feeling is this guy put a cam in it because the idle's a little bit rough and the idle is high. He's idling about 850, 900 RPM. And the issue with that is that the torque converter is tight on the 6L80. So it's tugging on the pedal when I come to a stop. In fact, right now I'm on the pedal and you can see that we're pushing 750 RPM in gear. These engines like to run between 500 and 600 RPM, and you can let the brake off and they barely move, but not this one. So the solution for this is going to be to bring the idle down if the cam isn't too big, or to run a looser converter. Now I do recommend, guys, if you're going to go anything bigger than a stage 1 cam, and when I say stage 1 cam, you know what I'm talking about, Brian Tooley and Texas Speed comp cams, basically that's a mild RV style cam, and you can get away with almost a stock tune in that setup. But if you're going to go to a stage 2 cam and get a lot of overlap and get that rump, then you're going to have to tune appropriately. You're going to have to jack that idle up, and if you're going to jack that idle up more than 600 or 700 RPM, get a looser converter. There's some options there. If you want to use the stock converter housing, you can get these 6L80 converters modified for a reasonable price. Now remember, this is a clutch-to-clutch transmission, so this converter is not the same as the old 4L60s. But if you really want to do it right, get a billet converter or a professionally built converter. They're going to cost a little bit more money, but they're going to give you a little bit better performance. Now this vehicle feels on the edge to me. I'm going to try to drop the idle a little bit if the customer wants me to, and we're going to see where it's at. Now running a cam with a supercharger isn't necessarily a bad thing. In my opinion, it's not really necessary because you can get as much horsepower as you want out of the supercharger and still have a good idle. But by running the bigger cam means that we are running some overlap, which is lowering cylinder pressure at the bottom end. Now that is leading to the rump, but it's also effectively reducing the cylinder pressure, and this is a relatively high compression engine. It's well over 10-to-1, and when you run a 10-to-1 engine with a blower, you got to be careful. It does run excellent once you get it off idle. If we can get this idle tuned, I think he'll be really happy. So this is something that I did want to talk about for a while, and that is when you do an engine conversions, one of the things that you want to consider is aftermarket support. Now if you were to get a hybrid where you put a Chrysler transmission behind a GM engine, or you were to get a Hemi, or you were to get a supercharger on your V6, all of those have support, but none of them can compare to the support that the LS and the LTs enjoy in the aftermarket today. What that requires is that you run basically a stock operating system, because when you run a stock operating system, everything is available to you. You're not going to be able to properly tune your LS with a Chrysler computer and a Chrysler transmission. But if you have a stock 6-liter or 6.2 with a stock 6L80, the world is your oyster. There's just so many things available to you. Camshafts, intake manifolds, blowers, throttle bodies, injectors, you name it. It's out there, and it's out there in quantity at a low price. And that's a serious consideration if you want to get more horsepower out of whatever you have. Maybe you got a 5.3 or a 6.0 and you went to bigger tires and you want to get a little bit more. It's so easy to get online and just Google some of the options out there, and there's a whole wealth of knowledge in the forums. LS One Tech, the HP Tuner, EFI Live Forum, guys are doing all this stuff and they're doing it all day, and you can get 400 horsepower out of the 5.3 plus. Now you all know that I recommend buying the horsepower that you want, because then you can run a stock tune. There is no custom tuning and there is no custom parts. But if you do have an existing engine and you want to get more performance out of it, it's available to you. And this vehicle, even though we did not put the supercharger on it, is proof that it can be done, and it can be done properly. I mean, this supercharger runs really, really good. It runs better than any V6 supercharger I've ever driven or turbocharger set up on a JK. And it runs that way because GM did offer this blower and did offer a 2- and 3-bar operating system and did offer the 6.2 in this configuration. So all you have to do is try to mimic that, and you get an engine putting out over 600 horsepower. with good drivability. So if you have an old LS3 or an L94, an L92, whatever, and you want to get an extra 150 horsepower, you can look at a blower. Back when the LSs were around, the LSA and the LS9 were top of the line. They put them in the Corvettes, Camaros, Cadillacs, and now they're doing the same thing with the LT4 and the LT5. And everything that we've said about the LT1 versus the LS3 applies to the LT4 versus the LS9. The direct injection and the CVVT give it more torque on the bottom, but I've had guys with these LS 6.2s run them in competition. I had a guy in Australia run an LSA in competition in a JK, and it was a several week race, and the engine never gave up. He was actually in first place. He had more power than the rest of the field until his rear axle gave out. So this is a little bit of a break from the normal test drive with these LTs and LSs. I'm taking this Jeep to the mountain right now. We're going to be back with a bunch of LT builds and I think a couple of more LS builds.